The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to our Enterprise Hive sponsored webinar. Enterprise Hive is pleased to provide you with convenient access to industry experts covering the hottest topics, trends, and best practices in social business technology. Get ready for a valuable, engaging, and thought-provoking session. Today's webinar is Gamification in the Workplace, presented by IDC's own Michael Fauscette. My name is Lauren Hart-Piper. I am the Vice President of Marketing and Product Management for Enterprise Hive. Before we begin, let me share the format and some housekeeping items of our webinar. Our presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes for questions and answers and some discussion. During the presentation, all attendees will be in a listen-only mode, and we will open up the line for live questions and discussion during the question and answer section of the presentation. During the webinar, you of course can submit questions in writing. Use the question text box on your webinar controls. When we begin the question and answer portion of our webinar, we will answer the written questions first, as well as take live questions from the audience. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available on the Enterprise Hive website 24 hours after its conclusion. So let's begin our presentation, Gamification in the Workplace, by introducing our featured presenter, Mr. Michael Fauscette. Michael leads IDC's Software Business Solutions Group, which encompasses research and consulting in enterprise software applications, including ERP, SCM, CRM, PLM, as well as collaboration and social applications. He is recognized and sought out for his thought leadership, specifically in the area of social applications and the transition to the social business. Having spent an extensive amount of time working with software and end users throughout his career, Michael has a business process orientation and end-user focused approach to software research and analysis. He conducts market research, analysis, and consulting on emerging markets and technologies like social business, Enterprise 2.0, end-user requirements, application implementation, and end-user experience. Prior to joining IDC, Michael held senior consulting and service roles with 7 software vendors, including Autodesk, PeopleSoft, and MRO. His software experience spans the entire enterprise lifecycle process. An ex-U.S. naval officer, he began his technology career as a surface line engineering officer. Michael is a published author, blogger, and accomplished public speaker on software, social media, and software strategies. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to present to you Mr. Michael Fauscette. Michael?
Great, thanks, Lauren. There we go. So, welcome to our discussion this afternoon, and hopefully we can share a bit about some of the interesting social tools that we've seen and some of the things that are really starting to impact business from the customer perspective, also from the employee perspective and the partner perspective. You know, I started looking at gamification probably 9-10 months ago, and it's something that I guess when I first started to look at it, and I'm not a skeptic when it comes to social business. I mean, I've been involved in this community for quite a while actually, but I think with gamification, you know, there was a bit of a perception that perhaps a lot of you have, or some of you have anyway, that you know, what we're really talking about when we talk about games and gamification is really more of a playtime activity and not something that really had a lot of enterprise applicability. And I saw a speaker actually at an event in the winter, Jane McGonigal, and I ended up reading her book, the book that's called Reality is Broken, and she looks at a lot of the topics and ideas around gamification and some of the impacts and some of the kind of broad-based research across a bunch of different functions that talk about, you know, the effectiveness of and the ability of gaming to, you know, to increase activity, to make people, you know, more engaged, more aware, those sorts of things. So I guess the short story is that I got really interested in the idea that perhaps I was wrong, and perhaps there were some interesting applications for some of these tools in the enterprise, some of the tools that had grown up in the online gaming world, but were now being applied to solve some specific business problems. So, I started doing more research around that, and as I looked at it, I realized that there was something here that, is very different and could be really interesting as we try to address some of the problems that we've looked at from a social business perspective over the last 5 or 6 years. So, if you think about the context, and I want to talk a little bit about what we're trying to look at, and then I'll talk about how the gamification piece of it applies. But if you think of the conditions that we've been in for the last several years, really at least since 2008, but a lot of these changes actually predate that recession. A lot of economic issues changing in challenge or conditions, competition that's grown up that's very different when it's enabled with the internet and with this sort of hyperconnectivity. Really a shift in our awareness of what customers want, and I think from a customer perspective, higher expectations in a lot of ways, and certainly a lot more tools and a lot more ways to interact with business. We've seen a lot of issues around talent, employment, and productivity. We have to, we've seen businesses taking cost out and trying to move that into being more innovative, being more creative. And then we've seen a lot of changes in technology, and I think all of those things together have created a very change-oriented, challenging business environment. And so we do very often surveys and research around what are the current concerns and trends in the enterprise. And this year, there were a couple things that really came out in the customer end of it. Businesses were definitely really focused around how do we get new customers and how do we stop losing the customers that we have. And so, for an initiative perspective, companies are really looking at customer experience, market expansion, and customer experience. And we'll talk a little bit about customer experience because that's certainly become the buzzword in the CRM business, in the customer-facing parts of the business, and it's a trend that is getting a lot of attention. And then, from an employee internal perspective, from a business perspective, how do I close this growing productivity gap that seems to be happening because we continue to do more and more with less and less resources based on the economics and based on some other changes in our business, and those are really starting to put a lot of pressure on the employees and on the business itself. And so really the second initiative for this out of this, the customer initiative, was how do we find new ways to work? What can we do differently that can make us more productive and get more out of the current resources that we have, and still be able to stay competitive, stay innovative as we develop our business. Of a grounding in what gamification is first, and then I'll talk about how it applies to some of these issues that we just talked about. So, I think the first thing you have to understand about gamification, and part of this happens really around social business technologies in general, is that gamification is really a business strategy. It's not a technology. Now, there's certainly technologies that enable it, but on the outset, as you're looking at what could I do with gamification, I really have to think of applying game mechanics to drive or change some behavior, modify behavior. So I can, understand my business, and I can find areas of my business where I want to change behaviors, whether that's a customer, a partner, or an employee, and then I can use some of these game techniques, game mechanics to actually impact that. So, I have to answer things like what behavior, and that's the number one step. What is it that I really want to do? I have to be specific. Again, I've said this a lot about other social technologies. You don't do those activities for their own sake. You do them because of some specific business outcome. And gamification is definitely, just in that category. Doing gamification in a broad-based kind of way without some particular behavior modification in mind is just not an effective use of your resources. So, what behavior, and then what's the behavior's impact or importance to your business strategy? And then the third step is really, when we start to get into the technology, what game theory in game mechanics and game techniques can you apply to actually impact and change, modify that behavior. So, if you think about it, we're looking at experiences, and when we talk about experiences, we're talking about employees, we're talking about customers, we're talking about partners. And the point here is that we're using games and game theory. So it by its nature needs to be fun and engaging. I mean, that's the point of this. It really came out of a leisure activity that now we know can be used very effectively in the enterprise, but it needs to be fun. It needs to be something that people want to do, want to get involved with, or you're not going to be effective. You're not going to get the outcomes that you want. So I built this very complicated looking model a while ago, but it's actually pretty simple, and it really, if you start with the behavior modification piece and work clockwise, we're talking about behavior. So what we're talking about are things like learning. Can I use game mechanics to get my employees to learn something, to interact with content in a way that helps them learn and get better, learn new skills, and increase their performance? Can I use game mechanics to impact customer loyalty? Can I get my customers more engaged in a community, for example, and help use the game mechanics to help drive that loyalty to my brand and get them more engaged and more active with my brand? Can I use that to get them to participate more in the community, to post more in the community, to encourage them to answer each other's questions, to interact with each other, those sorts of things. And then performance. Can I incent specific behavior? Can I, with the game mechanics, change that behavior around performance, or engagement, or participation, or productivity, collaboration, and the list is it goes on from there. But you get the idea. It's a specific behavior I want to impact. And then once I've done that, I look at these different types of game mechanics, and I can figure out which ones of those, and it's usually more than one, I can use to apply to this specific issue. So I want to have I want to increase the interaction with my online learning tools for my employees. Then perhaps I use achievements, perhaps I use a leaderboard. I have some challenges maybe, or I have some infinite game play and levels so that I can move people through certain levels. There's a whole list of, and they're fairly well documented online, so I won't read through every one of them. But and if you take a look at my blog, actually in the spring I wrote a series of 3 posts on this, and I went through these in pretty good detail. Very specific game mechanics that you can use, but there are a lot of them, and you can look at each one of them and figure out what levers you want to push to try to impact or influence people to move in a certain direction. And then, very important, assess. So you have to constantly assess what it is that you're trying to accomplish. If I'm trying to increase productivity, then what are my productivity measures? And then I measure them regularly, and if it's not working effectively, I have to go back and look at what behaviors and what mechanics I'm using to actually influence that, and then move something around to get the outcomes that I'm looking for. Same thing, then once I've done that, push into the reward area and really understand how is it that I'm rewarding this behavior so that I get continued engagement, because in most of the areas that we're talking about, you don't change behavior with one activity, you change behavior over time, and so you want people to engage with this activity, whatever it might be, in an ongoing basis. So perhaps you give them recognition as they accomplish things, you give them points or bonuses. Could be bonuses in a virtual way, can be real bonuses, could be prizes. I mean, there are all sorts of things that work. Could be access to information or access to people. There's a lot of different types of rewards you can use, but it's really this 4 steps. It's what's the behavior, what am I going to do from a mechanics perspective to influence that behavior, and is it working, so I assess it, and then how do I reward that behavior so that I get a continuous process and flow around these, into the activity or the game. So if you look at game mechanics, there's really 2 things. There's the game mechanics themselves, and like I said, there's a lot of those. challenges, for example. It's like a journey. You put obstacles in the way, and the player overcomes those obstacles to be successful in the game. So that's a challenge. But then the techniques are actually a little bit different and detailed around the techniques that you can use to encourage that behavior. So perhaps, for example, I want to tie this game activity inside my enterprise social network or activity stream, or I want to tie it into my customer community. Let's say I want to build public displays of the rewards, so I want some way to build a leaderboard or badges. I have these challenges in Quest, and then I have that drive behavior through recognition on the leaderboard. So there's mechanics and techniques, and they interrelate as you try to lay out what it is you're trying to do. And then just some examples of behaviors. So from a customer perspective, I mentioned loyalty already, participation in community management. So these tools are great for community managers that are trying to increase participation in the community, get more active customers into the community, more engaged customers in the community. And a lot of case study work we've done show that customers that are engaged and very active in the community tend to perform better as a customer. In other words, they buy more, or they help answer more questions, or they refer people more. It depends on what you're trying to drive out of your community, but you see much higher performance out of that. Increasing engagement. So are they more attached to my brand? Do they provide word of mouth advertising? Do they recommend me, in other words? Product feedback, product input. This is really good. Areas where we see companies that are using their entire customer base as product feedback so that they can either make new products or make better products that they already make, products and services, really. Commerce, lead generation, co-innovation. So there are a lot of behaviors there. And then from an employee perspective, things like sales productivity, performance, learning, participation. So I want the employees more active and actively participating in in whatever the activities might be, and also in the broader picture, I want them participating in developing better products, being more innovative, finding new ways of productivity, that sort of thing. Collaboration. This is one of the very important ones, and we'll talk about this a good bit more, but collaboration. Can I use gamification to help get employees to work more collaboratively? Increase use of technology. This is a really simple one, but some of you, I'm sure, have been around when new systems have been implemented, or trying to get people to use new tools, whatever they might be. And you can use gamification to actually help drive adoption of those tools, so you get broader adoption and deeper understanding and use of those tools, so you get better outcomes from your investment, or better return on your investment. And then product input and feedback, it applies from a customer perspective, also applies to an employee perspective. And I won't talk about this much today, but I also believe that there's a lot of opportunity to use the same types of activities with partners, and I'll talk about a couple of spot examples yet, because most of the case study work and most of what I've seen has actually been focused around customers and around employees, but the same thing, and we're seeing community used very effectively with partners, and I think it's only one step further to think about using the gamification platform and the gamification process to help increase the performance of your partners as well. But again, that's something I don't have a lot of great examples on yet, but I do believe that that there's a lot of opportunity there. So if we focus on customers for a minute, and let's talk about community and how gamification really ties into this idea. Peter Drucker said a few years ago, wrote a few years ago, the goal of business is to create a customer. And today I think if we flip that around and we look at it a little differently, what I think and what I often talk about is that the goal of the customer, because that's what we really need to be focused on as a business. Can we be customer centric? Can we understand this from the customer's perspective? And what they want or some desire. Those expectations drive their experience, build a customer experience strategy that takes into account customers that don't behave, that don't do what you want. And I think in the past, for example, a lot of marketing organizations focused around building customer journey maps, and I just have a fundamental issue with those today. And I think we have to move beyond maps to what I call models, customer experience models, because customers don't do everything that the company expects them to do. They do things in the way they choose. And as a company, we have to build flexibility into the way we interact with customers to actually, be open and flexible and able to deal with them when, where, and how they're choosing to do that, rather than trying to force them into some framework that we've built. So again, goal of the customers to fill a need, want, or desire, and that means they have these expectations. So let me give you a quick example. So let's say I'm on a business trip, which I certainly do quite often, and I'm staying in a nice hotel, and I call down to the front desk and I order a taxi. Now, in my mind, I have this in mind. I have this really nice Lamborghini taxi. So in other words, my expectation is I'm getting an extremely high-end taxi. So when I walk downstairs, that's what I expect to see out front, and I'm not going to be satisfied if that's not what I get. So that's my expectation. Now, the front desk, I told them I wanted a taxi. So what does the front desk provide? They provide transportation. They provide quite adequate transportation from their perspective, and yet when I walk outside and I see this, my expectations haven't been met, and so now we're set up for a situation where my customer experience is going to be much less than it would have been if they had understood my expectations more clearly and come closer to meeting those. So what do I mean? I mean, I have expectations as a customer, and when I have those expectations and I'm interacting with the business, there is some experience, and the experience hopefully overlaps my expectation. Now, it may not be very big overlap, and that may or may not be a problem, but hopefully there's this intersection in the middle that is expectation and overlapped by experience. And then if that's true, then I have this third overlap, and that's satisfaction. So there's a point in there where my expectation aligns with the experience and delivers a customer satisfied event. So I am now satisfied. The company got it right. And that's what we're really trying to do when we build these strategies. We're trying to get it right. So it's not a simple thing, and unfortunately it's not based on something we have control of as a business, so that makes it even more complex. It means that we really do have to focus more around this and build a strategy that can adapt and really be flexible enough to get there. And that's why customer communities play such an important part of this. So if you're building a relationship with a customer, it's pretty common knowledge that, and this is a little bit of a map, but it's pretty well understood that it's better to have an ongoing relationship with a customer than it is to constantly be acquiring new customers. In fact, the probability of selling a new prospect is 5 to 20%. The probability of selling an existing customer is close to 70%. So, where do I want to be? As a business, I obviously want to be in that 70% and not in that 5%. So it's really important to build the experience of a customer community can be so effective. In customer communities, we see them used a lot in customer service, and that's one of the first places where we saw a really high return. But now we're really starting to see businesses use them in marketing, use them in sales, and use them in product development, product innovation. So I could have a customer community, and I only have one customer community generally. I mean, there's some exceptions, but most businesses, it's one customer community, and it's used for multiple things. So I have my one customer community, and I could use that community to get feedback on products. I can use that community to, drive high experience and interaction, and perhaps using gamification, build engagement, which leads to word-of-mouth marketing. I can, use that to source prospects, and I can use it to educate, because the sales process today is about educating and helping customers learn about you versus an old sort of sales model, I think. So the customer community is a really important destination, a big part of your strategy. So with that, we did the survey, and this is another data point off of the social business survey we do every year. We took this data out of the field in February. It was just published this summer. And you can see that the #1 activity that customers, or that businesses rather, said that they were going to do this next 12-month period was to implement online communities. And it's because we're starting to see, from a case study perspective, really, really amazing results out of these communities. And I have case study after case study that I've shared in the past that that talks about all the return that you can see out of that. Well, if you start to think of how could I use gamification on this list, though, so community is obviously the #1, and we'll talk about how it that works there. But there's a bunch of other things on this list that really lend themselves well to the gamification concept. So, for example, social learning or recruiting, enterprise social networks, using and getting activity on the enterprise social network, feedback, productivity. So there's a bunch of these really high-profile examples of places where gamification really starts to tie together. Now, you'll also notice on this survey that we ask about it, and although it's lower on the list today, you can see it's a growing trend. And if you would compare this to the survey last year, you would have seen that gamification didn't actually show up at all as an initiative. And yet this year, 18, almost 20% of our respondents had, external gamification on their agenda for the next 12 months, and internal gamification. So in other words, customer-facing and employee-facing. I mentioned the community and business benefits of the community, so I won't go through these in great detail, but again, important as you think about why I want to tie gamification to this, because the communities, acquiring new customers, getting to know the customer better, engaging the customer, learning about the customer. So in other words, sales intelligence, designing better products, so getting good ideas, getting feedback, taking the voice of the customer and sharing that internally across the activities that might want to be, engaged there. You have product development, product design that don't usually have the opportunity to see broad representation of your customers' opinions about the company, about the brand, about the product. But they could do that using the community. Reducing your support costs, one of the best places we've seen community play. And then customer intelligence-driven marketing. So the more data, the more I know about the customer, the higher level of trust I build with the customer, and the more engaged they become, the greater the chance I can, learn enough about them to do this one-to-one targeting, that I can really start to know enough about them that I can start to predict behavior versus just react. So again, great data out of the community, and really important from a marketing perspective. And so what do I want? I want customers engaged in this community. And so how are companies using gamification in this? Now, this is a really simple example, but it's a customer community, and it's a virtual mobile network provider. That sounds complicated, but what it actually means is a phone company that doesn't own any networks. They're a mobile phone provider. They sell SIM cards basically, and provide access through a leased arrangement to a network. So they can, depending on their setup, they could be very cost effective, and they can, offer some pretty competitive deals. In the case of this company, which launched a couple of years ago, they decided they were going to use a community support only model, which is, which means they had much lower support cost if it worked, although they could have very high dissatisfaction if it didn't work. So they implemented this support model, and they wanted to use a gamification scheme, a rewards model, to get people to participate in the community. So get them to participate from the standpoint of answering questions, posting content, and also referring. And so for each of those types of activities, they had levels, and they have ways to create that interaction, and they reward those customers with minutes. So a simple way to reward. So in the game, you win minutes by referring or by doing activities that lead to a referral, lead to posting more, lead to answering more questions successfully, that sort of thing. Now the results of that, and look at this, and I think this is a pretty astounding, actually. 75% of their new subscribers are word of mouth. They have almost $0 in their marketing budget. And yet, and I don't know how much you know about the Net Promoter Score, but the idea is Net Promoter Score is really, will you recommend this brand to somebody else? And of course, very important, 75% of their subscribers are coming through word of mouth. A 73% Net Promoter Score is unbelievable, particularly in a model that doesn't have their own customer service. They actually rely on their customers to support themselves, pretty much. I mean, they have community management there. So a very effective use of a simple technique of this, rewards through this activity that drew more customers in and had them doing referrals. Yeah, a technology vendor. They actually are a platform as a service vendor. That they had a internal support organization, but it was very expensive and not really as productive as they wanted it to be. So they decided to launch a community support model. So they used gamification to encourage and reward to get their customers to, and these are really ISV partners, so they're really development partners, to engage with the content, to look up things in the knowledge base. So rather than going to the internal support organization, there's a self-service way to do it, to complete surveys, so tell the company what they think of this process, and then provide feedback on the product and other activities. So they built a set of achievements. So achievements are single activities that provide a result, and missions. So missions tie together a series of achievements. And so with that, they launched this community, and over the period of a year, they were able to reduce their support tickets by 20%. They saw a 40% increase in forum and knowledge base use. So a resource that they had built that wasn't very utilized in the past went up 40% in the first year. And then they saw a 40% reduction in the time it took their own support people to answer answer customers' inquiries, customer issues. So because of the results, eliminating a lot of these really simple issues that could have been resolved from the knowledge base or could have been resolved by a peer, those internal support people were able to focus more on the important issues and be more productive. So again, a very good result from a really simple game mechanic, achievements and missions. So, if we look at communities then, and when I list communities, best practices, I talk about professional management, I talk about analytics, I talk about building trust and keeping the content fresh. But one of the most important things now that I think that companies really have to focus on is this is gamification. How do I use gamification to drive and build engagement in that community? Now, if we think of the employee workforce, and this is what I talked about up front, this productivity gap. So just some statistics from the Bureau of Labor that we've watched for a few years and been tracking. You see that over the last several years in the 2000s, productivity has increased, continued to increase, and you see that employment actually has dropped off fairly significantly. What does it mean? It means there's a gap. It means that you're doing a lot more with a lot less people, and you continue to do more every year, and you're continuing to do that with less and less people. So it could be a situation that leads to, it leads to a very bad outcome eventually. So what I think, if you look at systems, and that bottom level system, the system of transaction, companies use that for years to automate, and automation gave you more productivity. In other words, it helps you do more with less people. But there's a limit to that, and I think that we finally reached that, and above that, we have these new systems of decision and systems of relationships. Relationship systems are like enterprise social networks, things that help people work together, and systems of decisions are just simply systems that get information out to in some work context, to the right person at the right time. So the combination of the two are really important, and I call them the systematic support, or the way to automate these ad hoc decisions that make up, by survey data we've seen, make up about 80% of information workers' time dealing with these ad hoc decisions. So in other words, if I could get people to participate in these systems of relationship and use the systems of decision to take the data and drive better, more effective, more efficient decision making for these exceptions, things that fall above the automation line, then I would be able to close the productivity gap. I'd be able to continue to do more with less people because I would be using another form of automation again, the ability to get the right person and the right data together around a problem to make a good decision, and I'd be able to do that in real time. If I could do that, then I would in fact be able to help close this productivity gap going forward. Now, I think that's one of the most important initiatives for companies to think about today from an internal perspective. How do we close that gap? And this is the only way that I've seen that really, excuse me, the only way that I've seen it really effectively starts to deal with that. And really to do this, to eliminate silos, because that's one of the biggest drains on resources today are the internal silos that keep information and people separated from the data and unable to make effective decisions, which creates more and more work and kills productivity. So if I look at that and the systematic look of this, so in other words, the system relationship, system of decision, system of transaction, they're really taking inputs. So they're taking this data from all these different news sources and old data sources, transaction data all the way out to email, mobile, social, all these, even Internet of Things, sensors. And I put that in context of some work, some decision, and I get the right person there, I could then make the right response. And so rather than a make-sell business, I could become this sense and respond business that's flexible, that has the capability to be more productive, do more with less. But to do that, I have to get my people to collaborate, to work together. So how do I do that? Well, I have to increase performance, increase productivity, increase use of these tools. I have to get them to use the enterprise social networks, more effectively collaborate, and to use the systems of decision and push those together to drive more effective decision making. I have to get them working across silos. I have to try to get rid of my organizational and data silos by getting people and unlocking the potential of those people so that they can become this connected workforce. And this actually extends outside the firewall too. It extends to partners, and it really extends to customers to some extent as well. And when you start talking about co-innovation or collaborative product design, it's really about engaging the employees and the customers together to come up with better products. So that actually extends out. But my problem continues to be that while I have these tools and I'm starting to go down this path, and 79% of the companies we survey have an enterprise social network already deployed. Actually, 30% of those have more than one, which may be a problem. But to get people to use those, though, I need a tool, and so that's where gamification really comes into this. So, a couple quick examples here. Large consulting organization, they had developed a really extensive online executive development program, professional development program, and unfortunately, though, they launched this. They built some great resources to help people learn new skills and work more effectively and be more productive. But nobody was using it. They had, very, very little interaction. When they surveyed their executives and their senior managers and their partners, basically, they got the feedback that I don't have time. I'm busy working on customer engagement and, doing billable activities, and I just don't have time to do this learning activity. So they built a system that used points, achievements, and missions, and they actually took the missions and they mapped them to what in the training world we'd call a guided learning path. So, I want you to develop a specific set of skills, and I'd have a series of courses that I'd want you to take to do that. That would be a mission. So I'd get points, I'd have achievements along the way to reinforce, and then in the end I would, accomplish some mission. And then I'd get some reward for that interaction with the content. So recognition on public profiles. They built a leaderboard so that and they knew that their employee base was fairly competitive, so they thought that would be effective. So what happened? They launched that, and after 3 months, they saw that the return activity to the use, to using the these online tools, the return rate was 46% daily, so it gone up 40% 46% daily, and 36% weekly. So they found that active users, which was an increasing community, had actually already unlocked 3 achievements in only 3 months. And they had designed this long kind of path. Actually, they thought it was a 12-month path, but people got so excited about it that they had a user actually get through their entire 12-month process in 6 months. So very surprised by how excited people got. And in fact, when they surveyed those same people that used to say, I don't have time, I'm too busy, they found out that they now say that the training was addicting and it was fun. So they started to use those positive terms, and the positive result, of course, was that more and more people started to use those tools. Now, the other example I have is a large automotive manufacturer, and they're a dealership model, and their dealers have salespeople, they have service people, and they have parts people that they needed to have at a certain level of productivity. And so they had fairly extensive training and certification programs. So if I'm a mechanic, for example, I'd have different levels of certification that I could get to learn how to be more effective at repairing and doing specific activities. And so they took that, they rolled this out, they rolled out a similar sort of community-based activity set that that we saw in the other example, reward exploration and reward demonstration of knowledge that they gained in this community. So the tools they use are the game techniques and game mechanics they use, task and mission. So they use badges, they use levels, and then they had trophy cases. So you could individually show your trophies and talk about how successful you've been. And then they also built, because they wanted team participation, so they wanted, in other words, competition among their dealers. So they built individual and team leaderboards, so they could help drive collaborative group behavior through this as well. And then they wanted to ensure that their dealers were not only participating in doing these level activities, so learning things, but they wanted to make sure there was retention. So they actually put trivia challenges in there, and you could get more points and go up on the leaderboard by answering questions about things that you had done in the past. So it helped with retention because they were reviewing these types of things, in an ongoing way. And then they had this virtual dream garage where you could, you could display all of these things that you had won, and of course it's an automotive thing, so garage, I guess, is the right paradigm. So the results, well, the first day when they launched this, first day, 100,000 unique hits. By week 5, they had 2 times the activity in this system of training, learning, and certification that they had had in the past. And they went through all their major KPIs over that first year or two, and they saw all their major KPIs go up. So in other words, unit volumes went up, customer satisfaction went up with those parts and service personnel that they interacted with. So they saw a significant increase in those key metrics simply based on getting their dealers to participate more and to learn more and to interact more in this community. So, gamification, what should I learn? Well, I said it's a strategy, not a technology, and it's fairly involved, and there are a lot of pieces around game mechanics that I only just barely touched on, and around behaviors that I only barely touched on here. But hopefully you get the idea that it's a strategy, not a technology, and you need to tie it very specifically to your business strategy so that you know what behavior you're trying to modify to get the right outcomes. And then the second piece is there's technology, important technology that can underpin this that helps you execute these different types of activities, flexible, adaptable platform that really underpins your strategy. And then once you do this, if you're going through the process, you aren't doing gamification for gamification to get specific outcomes, behaviors. So you have to be very specific about what you want to get out of it. Using game mechanics to target those specific behaviors. So remember the 4 boxes, this cycle that I showed you. You're getting behaviors, then you use the game mechanics to influence the behaviors, you assess that, you reward the behaviors that are the proper ones, the ones you wanted, and then hopefully that's a continuous cycle. Changing culture and process that it has to be an activity generally that is ongoing and builds engagement over time and interaction, so that you get this long-term behavior change, not just short-term. And then lastly, gamification for its own sake is, like I said, it's a fail. It's not effective to simply define it very carefully and build the game to get that outcome. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Michael. Before we get to our question, we are. So as I just switch my screen here from Michael. Okay, at Enterprise Hive, our mission is to help people in their professional careers and their personal lives. We know that one of the most frustrating, difficult issues that each and every one of us face is finding the people and the information for answers that we need to be successful. So at Enterprise Hive, we focus on providing quality, innovative, and feature-rich solutions that help not only employees but customers and partners easily get to the information they need to do their jobs. We help solve organizational challenges, and a number of these you already heard as Michael went through them. Increasing customer loyalty, managing resource constraints. We're all trapped, as Michael showed, that productivity gap that we have, not only with time but actual resources, people, a number of areas. We all have to manage, do more with less, and it continues to be that way in our environments. And again, enhancing customer service and satisfaction. We want to be in that percentage of selling into our current customers, and how we do that is with customer service and having excellent ratings in our customer satisfaction levels. And also accelerate sales. We are dealing now with a new customer. It is a new sales model. As we have seen, there are reports that come out that by the time someone can talk to you, they're already 70% in the sales funnel of making their decision. And of course, there's so much communication and so much noise that's out there now with the internet, but we want to be able to open and streamline those employee, customer, and partner communications so that everyone is on the same page. So we offer social business software, and that social business software we called Hive Social, and it really is to help maintain those customer or those complex online communities, whether it be for employees to employee, employee to customers, customers to customers, employees to partners, partners to customers. It's a very complex environment and communication that we live in today. With Hive Social, we offer a community and gaming platform. It is all-inclusive. We have Hive Social Solution for customer service, Hive Social Solution for sales and marketing, as well as Hive Social for product lifecycle management. Each online community has its own gaming platform. And so we have what you would look for within an online community. We are a SaaS solution, hosted and user configurable. Leading-edge content and collaboration tools with an online wiki for internal collaboration and knowledge management, file repository, online chat, activity streams, as well as community management administration, making it easy for our community managers to be able to facilitate, manage, and handle their online communities. And we provide the essential elements for healthy and vibrant communities with our gamification platform. To find out more about Enterprise Hive and our solutions, please visit our website at enterprisehive.com. And now at this time, I'd like to open it up for some questions. We did have a couple questions that were written in during Michael's presentation. The first question, Michael, I believe is for you. Can gamification overcome a poor user experience?
That's a very complicated one, isn't it? You know, I think that you can use gamification to modify behavior pretty effectively across a lot of different activities, and getting people to use to use technology is definitely one of them. I don't think there's any question about that. But I will say that it's really difficult to modify behavior to get people to do something that they're just simply not inclined to do. So, you know, employees today are particularly sensitive to user experience when it comes to technology, because they've been conditioned to expect, you know, simple, clean interaction with the software they use, for example, and they want it to resemble what they use in their personal life. And so simplicity up front, complexity behind. A lot of older enterprise systems don't have that paradigm embedded. In fact, they were built with the idea to get the work done, and they didn't hide any complexity, so they can be very complex to use. And so I think you could have maybe some effect using gamification on it, but in the end, it's not going to cause people to do something that is simply against their own nature. If they're not going to, if the user experience is so bad, then you're going to have a really hard time getting people to use it. You could have some effect probably, but I'd be very doubtful that you know, that you could use that alone. Fix the user experience, and then get people into the system using gamification, and it would be very successful. The other way, I'm a little questionable on that one.
Okay, the next question is, what format did the virtual garage take? Build a platform or use a product?
So actually the idea was that it was almost like a virtual trophy case, really. So it was a way to use the achievements and display the achievements, and help really encourage participation through the competition. So it was a technology that was used online to display achievements. You know, much like you see a leaderboard or whatever else, except this was more visual and had more, you know, trophies and the more capability to display.
Or do you need to factor in gamification from the very beginning?
Yeah. Well, you know, I will say this, that you can use, if the platform that you pick, and this is fairly technology dependent, if you pick a gamification platform that has the capability to integrate across a broad set of different tools. I mean, you know, the simple example usually is, well, I have a customer community already. I want to now use gamification to try to encourage an increased activity. Could I do that? Yeah, I mean, you could certainly do that with most of the platforms out there, at least the ones that I would recommend, because that's certainly a capability they need to have. But, you know, could you be more effective if you were launching a customer community by building gamification into the launch? Yeah, no question. So, you know, if you're already out of the gate, so to speak, then you don't have a choice, because you're not going to retract it and start over. You're going to, you know, build on what success you've had. Then yes, you'd be able to use the platform with whatever technology you deployed. But, you know, there's a greater chance of even more return, or more faster results, I guess I should say, by doing it and building it in as you build and deliver whatever it is you're trying to use that. So I think that, you know, maybe and you could certainly get a better return out of one approach over the other, but you can get a really good return as well by picking the right platform.
Right, and if I could just, you know, stress from an enterprise Hive perspective, that is exactly what we have done, is that we have embedded the gaming mechanics and the gaming engine right within our online community platform, so that it's all there to launch at one time with predefined quests or activities to help individuals first learn how to use the platform, and then from there you can expand the platform very easily, simply configurable to incent other types of behaviors that are more specific to your organization. Our next question is, how compatible are some of the technology-enabled game activities with traditional games used in training? So I think this is more of how can we use gamification with training.
I mean, the whole game mechanics set of tools could work. At least some of them could work offline. They're designed really off of online gaming, so most of them have some tie-in to the technology. But I think in traditional learning environments, so in classroom environments, could you integrate in some online capabilities from a gaming perspective, and also perhaps from just from a training and learning perspective? The answer is yeah. I think that's actually proving to be this hybrid approach is proving to be very effective in a lot of companies. And a lot of companies are moving away from classroom because self-paced learning and social learning is proving to be more effective. But in some instances, classroom learning is still an important part. But you could add to that experience by tying in the gamification activities is the follow-up to that, even that ties the people together in a community in a longer-term basis, and use the gamification to drive more, to continue whatever you've done in the classroom. I think that could be really effective. So I think there are ways to do it, but at the same time, it is tied to an online activity. So you'd have to really plan through how you want to use that as a part of the combined or hybrid effort. But I've seen it done, and I think it could be really effective.
Okay, our next question is the current gamification technology disruptive to the customized services provided by traditional incentive recognition companies like Merit, Business Incentives, Carlson, etc.?
Well, I don't know. I think I do think gamification is disruptive in some ways around any of those kinds of traditional activities, but it's probably bigger than just the gamification piece. And if you look across the whole kind of approach, when you talk about customer communities and loyalty programs and building loyalty and operating them, it's very different when you have this online component and you can add the gamification in. The same thing's true in employee performance. Some of the traditional, ways to do that and reward people, reward employees for performance. I mean, the old kind of sales spiff sort of thing. Those are around, and they're going to be around for quite a long time. But a lot of research has shown that those things were all pretty fundamental and basic. Oh, I'm going to do this, and I get a sales spiff, or I get to, get something off this catalog or whatever. And a lot of research has shown that people are maybe more. A lot of people are more motivated by the recognition and by some of these other types of rewards that have more, visibility than they actually have. Compensation related or prize related kind of activities. So, is it disruptive? Yeah, I think it is disruptive as more and more companies start to understand how effective they can be with, frankly, with things that aren't as expensive to operate and that can be operated very effectively in conjunction with some other activities that I think they have to be looking at anyway. I mean, we saw the number of companies that are rolling out online communities. There's a reason they're doing that. They're doing that because online communities are extremely effective when it comes to helping build your customer experience strategy or helping motivate and change the performance of your workforce. So yeah, I think all of that technology is pretty disruptive.
All right. Well, I'm sorry, but it appears that we're at the top of the hour and that we're out of time. I want to thank you all for attending our webinar, and please visit us at enterprisehive.com for more information. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.